The cost of letting go, or the ambiguity of truth, letting go of the need for control. When you have a spiritually transformative experience without any ego, you can say that you've been removed from the herd. After this, all of the things that attracted you begin to pale. Your attachments begin to run out of gas. The silk scarf of your soul is being lifted out of the thorn bush of this lower plane, one thorn at a time. You may even feel empty for a while. That's the house cleaning that's needed for something greater and more wonderful to come and reside. But there is a price to pay, and the cost is everything you thought you knew. Even on a good day, we're constantly bombarded with ambiguities, and their uncertainty is a Rorschach test for our uncertainties to project themselves. Positive people view these uncertainties as in terms of possibilities, while negative people see threats everywhere. It's interesting how some spiritual truths are seemingly the most ambiguous. The Tao Te Ching is full of them, cover to cover, leaving many readers scratching their heads wondering what fortune cookie company put the book together. Westerners may be more familiar with the Bible, and that's Job 1:21. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gives, and the Lord takes away. May the name of the Lord be praised. As you can imagine, depending on whether a thorn in your side has been removed or you've just lost a loved one, we consider that statement with equal amounts of gratitude and cynicism, just as Job did as he flip-flopped on where he and God stood. For many who have had spiritually transformative experiences, the greatest ambiguity of that truth may come in its integration with your life, especially where relationships are concerned. To your spouse, you look and sound the same, but you aren't the same person. Your personal values, your shared dreams, and prejudices may have just gone poof, and as you wake up every day wondering if what was true yesterday is still true today, your spouse is wondering where their husband or wife has gone. This uprooting of relationships reverberates through the rest of your family, friends, and professions, even places of worship, echoes of fading memories. This is a measure of how we find ourselves thinking and reacting differently in a constant state of amazement that some people call self-absorption. As I told one would-be therapist, it's funny how self-absorbing a depersonalizing experience can be. Bottom line, an NDE introduces an ambiguity into the relationship, and no relationships welcomes that kind of uncertainty. It leaves people wondering where they fit into this new puzzle, if at all. To continue the reference to the Rorschach test, watch how your friends and family project their struggles in coming to grips with the new you. As I've said before, none of this is really about you. It's all about them. If they accept it and are even curious about it, then that's a good relationship to have, as they can help you understand the ways in which you have changed from the person they knew yesterday to the person they see today. But for those who react negatively out of fear, it leaves you wondering about the nature of so many relationships in general and how they're transactional. When you no longer offer what you did before, to them the deal is broken and they're ready to walk. When this happens, there's an opportunity to view it with the new sense of self that's stimulating these changes. Through greater empathy, you can see the situation through their eyes and realize that there are no good and bad people here, just overwhelmed ones. It's understandable, may even be justifiable, that they need to leave. They didn't sign up for this journey, but another. Not all relationships are able to make this jump, and here you are with this quantum leap, leaving everyone in the dust. There are simply fewer common reference points to make sense out of life in a shared way. If detachment is a result of your spiritual transforming experience, then that can soften the blow a little for you as you readjust to understanding how solitary the new path can be. That detachment, coupled with empathy, that sounds paradoxical, I know, can give you a really different view of things. I myself was married to a widow with 3 children. I was in a plane crash, had an NDE while in a coma, and eventually she left. Since my NDE and learning to trust in the grand design, I don't pray anymore. I trust God to give me what I need, sometimes just in the nick of time. But as we were struggling and attending marriage counseling, one day I asked God for help with my marriage. Immediately the response came that I would have a wife for as long as He wanted me to have a wife. Now, many people take exception, but if He had responded the same in terms of how long I would have my life or a particular job, no one would mind. But it shows how possessive many people still are, thinking others to be their property, sexual or otherwise. Bottom line is, the price I paid for my NDE was that my life just doesn't belong to me anymore. And that was further made clear when I realized that I was never intended to be her lifelong husband. It was intended I'd be the lifelong father to her otherwise fatherless children. Whatever you think of it, I guess people can have married for worse reasons. As an interesting footnote to our story, toward the end of our attempt at marriage counseling, she was complaining about my past behaviors, to which the therapist remarked that none of them were that bad or outside the norm of many marriages. I asked if I had exhibited any of these behaviors since my NDE, but she would only reference as the accident. Being a truthful person, she acknowledged that I had not. I then said that this was because that person died in the crash, and the person sitting in front of her was what was left now. And then something came into me, and I had no choice but to say it. I said that, as with most couples, our marriage vows included, until death do us part. What does it mean when one of us dies, no matter that we return? Our covenant is broken, and the only reason we would stay together is simply because we choose to. You can imagine how well that was received. Certainly, one of the after effects of an NDE is the reflection of looking in the mirror of truth at yourself. Unable to any longer delude yourself, the egotistic reflection of the world is replaced with the spiritualizing reflection of the other, and so you begin to turn the projector off. Less and less you color in the world and people around you with hopes and desires as they fade away, and you see things as they really are. In seeing how disconnected so many people are, you can, go without judging them so harshly. I honestly think that many, if not most people, have little choice in how they react to life. It's like they're on autopilot or in the back seat while their urges and fears take the wheel. Like someone better than me said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." In response, those who were killing him, who he forgave, cast lots to divide his garments, which kind of drives home the point, doesn't it? So as we see ourselves and life around us in a new way, day by day, we have to adjust to the fact that many, if not most of the people and things we enjoyed before no longer give us that enjoyment. Those attachments simply run out of gas. Regarding that feeling of emptiness I mentioned. In the Tao Te Ching, it says that a vessel has value because of what is there, like the clay it's made of, and utility is what is not there, its carrying capacity. That's what's going on here. We're becoming aware of our capacity for spiritual utility, and that sense of emptiness is the cleaning away of the residue of the old, and it's washed away. With no other choice in how to live, living the spiritual truths of honesty, detachment, comfort with ambiguity, which some call faith, empathy, and a new sense of what love might be, we fill in the gaps of our understanding with our experience of those truths, allowing us to restate them in our own words and own them in our own way, that when we share them, resonate with an authority born of first-hand experience, to which people respond. To me, this is the core of the integration process, something in dire need of more discussion that I see. While some references to it say that this stage lasts up to 10 years, I think it may well last a lifetime. It's a big pill to swallow. Linear and nonlinear understanding, the difference in looking for answers and understanding. I've referred to different frames of reference and how it is helpful to change them in approaching a question or solving a problem. Specifically, I've referred to linear and nonlinear ways of thinking. Let's compare them. Who robbed the bank? Linear thinking pursues answers through a step-by-step process that has a go, no-go gate at the conclusion of each step, deciding whether we move on or go around again. Thinking this way lends itself to very binary thinking. Things are black or they're white. Either the person's a robber or they're not. They have an alibi maybe. These types of thinkers may miss seeing an opportunity or reaching a compromise. Some patterns of information remain invisible to them. They're thinking inside the box because defining the problem means defining the box and then working on it, usually from the inside. This is how most of the world thinks. But what happens to your problem-solving journey if the primary assumptions or procedures break down? It's also impossible to think or process information this way when you're present. Why do people rob banks? Nonlinear thinking brings understanding by promoting thinking and problem solving, which extends in an outward expansion spiral. This provides multiple starting points from which one can study a problem. Such thinkers can walk around the problem and find the way through, rather than trying to solve just the surface symptom. Most world problems are caused by problems stacked on top. Linear thinking keeps the mind sliding on the surface, going around in a circle. Nonlinear thinking goes deeper, spiraling through different perspectives, revealing other aspects of consideration. This is a more evolved way of thinking. It's also more natural to think and process information this way when being present. Instead of following the breadcrumbs, you see the whole loaf. Your awareness of this emerges when you realize that you aren't using your memory to understand things. You don't need a memory to perceive a complex and dynamic pattern moving in front of you. When you're really present, it's with no memory of the past or anticipation of the future. It's with your intuition. Even when we chew it slowly, we discover new layers and depths with each consideration. Part of this transition may be seeing more and more shades of gray between the absolutist binary thinking. This is because you're no longer blinded by that which you once thought you were, your desires and your fears. Waking up like this in a sleepwalking world creates definite challenges. Finding others like yourself who are coping with this transition helps. The more still you are, the more power in the unmanifest potential you see, while the rest of the world celebrates cathartic explosions of attachment and vice. In this stillness, you walk your own path. Otherwise, trying to please everyone else, trying to follow many rules which seem arbitrary to you, means you're living someone else's life, not yours. Here's another slightly oblique way to look at nonlinear thinking. Have you ever been in a meditative or dreamlike state and were aware of thinking about something simply too big to bring back? Upon returning, it's on the edge of your memory, but you can't quite bring it to the surface. There may even have been emotions associated with it, and those can be stronger than the thought itself. My analogy is this. Imagine you're living in a bottle. The neck of the bottle is too narrow to crawl through, but you can stretch your arm through it and into the grate outside. If someone balanced an orange on the opening of the bottle, you would see a small section of the entire orange from within the bottle. In reaching your arm out into the world beyond, you might be able to hold that orange in your hand. Then you can rotate it around, and you can feel its weight and its texture. You may even bring back its scent on your fingers, but you can't bring the orange back into the bottle with you, and you can't leave the bottle to see the fruit in its entirety. To describe the orange to someone in the bottle with you, there is only your limited process of discovery with which to use insufficient analogies. But if you could go outside the bottle, seeing the orange in that one moment would tell you everything. That's the difference between linear thought inside the bottle trying to understand the orange versus the nonlinear understanding and knowing an orange with a single glance or a moment's taste. Here's how I've split a few hairs to categorize some things with linear and nonlinear information processing. Linear thought, defined by answers, purpose, content, manifest, words, and logic. Nonlinear thought, characterized by understanding, meaning, process, unmanifest, symbols, and vision. Answers and purpose are usually the fruit of linear sequential steps, with meaning and understanding being non-linear breakthroughs, aha moments, recognizing patterns through the spiraling procedural process. Yet how firm are you in purpose if you aren't clear on the meaning of your purpose-driven actions? A similar relationship exists between content and process, manifest and unmanifest, and words and symbols, not to mention logic and vision. For example, I'm thinking of a physics lecture I once attended. Our professor was discussing how differently a trip taken at relativistic speeds, those approaching the speed of light, would look to the traveler and to an observer standing still back at the launch pad. Skipping to the end of the high-level overview, he wrote Einstein's simple equation, E equals mc squared. If you plug in values to this equation, you'll eventually see that if you could propel mass toward the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second in the vacuum of space, that mass would appear to increase toward infinity, as time relative to us would appear to contract toward zero, and the distance between it and whatever far distant target it's heading to would also contract to zero, which is another way of saying that if you could go to the speed of light, you'd be everywhere there is to be instantly and weigh everything there is to weigh. If you hear that and are spiritually inclined, it more than boggles the mind. If you take it a step further, it also says that for light itself, there is no time. And perhaps this is why once we take leave of this mass, our bodies, we enter realms that have less or no mass, and time flows differently. I wonder if each plane we go through, as we go further from the physical one, has a slower passing of time until we get to the still point in which time doesn't pass at all. Having conceptually stated his case, the professor then wanted to drive home the frame of reference aspect of the relativistic travel exercise, how life would look to the traveler and again to the observer. To best demonstrate, he used math. That's what physics is, right? Most of us are familiar with the Cartesian coordinate system that uses x and y, and for a third dimension, z. There are other types of coordinate systems we can use to locate things in space too. In a two-dimensional world, you can use polar coordinates with a companion three-dimensional reference system called spherical coordinates. It makes sense. Polar implies movement along a circle, and polar coordinates measure position as a function of distance from some reference point and at some angle above that reference direction. And when you add a third dimension to a circle, you have a sphere. So then we're using spherical coordinates to locate your presence in space. The professor proceeded to use the polar coordinate system to prove his theorem, and it took 3 big whiteboards and most of the class to do it. Finally, he proved his point, and we thought that was pretty cool. Then he looked at his watch and said, "Now, here's how it looks in using spherical coordinates, adding in that third dimension." Well, we all thought his watch must have stopped because there were only 5 minutes left of the class, and he'd already used up most of it in 3 whiteboards explaining it to us in 2 dimensions. So he returned to the board and used one small area to write 3 lines in spherical coordinates. Doing that, he proved the power of another frame of reference over the first one. By stepping outside the 2-dimensional world of polar coordinates to the 3-dimensional world of the spherical, he said in 3 lines what it took 3 whiteboards and 50 minutes to say. That drives home the appreciation of looking at things from different angles in search of the highest, most comprehensive and fundamental perspective. After my NDE, I began splitting hairs to a finer degree, resulting in these types of dichotomies. In terms of content versus process, when you go to the movies next, think of how most people go for the content, the movie star, the genre, the story, whatever they like. Process is where you would watch the movie from a more technical point of view, analysis of the script, the type and timing of the music as a cue to understanding the scene, camera angles, lighting, composition, the focus of the lens on the subject, and even subtext. You measure the efficacy of all you analyze by the reaction of the audience. You could get so wrapped up in analyzing the film, its content becomes secondary in importance. Yet if you do this enough, you just might learn how to make a movie. By looking at patterns, you discover the underlying formula that things and events use for their birth, duration, and expiration. DNA may look like a thing, but the information inherent in it translates into a lifelong process of unfolding, which we call living life. You have to disengage from the excitement of the moment to see the patterns operating beneath. There are styles of speech meant to whip a crowd up into a frenzy, whether by preachers or politicians, and these are usually full of emotional triggers rather than logical ones. Once you realize that, it's harder to be manipulated by the speaker's objectives, manifest and unmanifest. In many religions and schools of philosophy, this distinction is made. There may even be a changing percentage between the two, depending on where on the continuum your frame of reference is. The higher planes are called the sublime, and the lower planes, including the earth, are the manifest, defined by their intensity. Our attention is drawn to one or the other. The excitement of a loud party, adrenaline-driven sports, attractive people we want to connect with, wealth, power, and so on. Things which by their definition are desires made manifest and intensity measured on the cover of grocery store tabloids and social media likes. It's a merry-go-round, and eventually the rider tires. They want to get off. The excitement becomes repetitive. Once you see it enough and the formulas that drive it, what comes next is less of a surprise and eventually predictable to the point of boredom. This is where the statement, "the truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable," takes effect. Just because you see the shallowness and predictability of the world doesn't mean your eyes are yet attuned to the more subtle worlds beyond this one. Until then, you may be drawn in preparation to books that take your thoughts in this direction, and new friends who are also loosening their grip upon the world. Eventually, the time will come when the richest foods, strongest wine, and beautiful forms will simply not hold your attention like they used to. As we think, so we become. As you come to appreciate the subtle over the intense, seeing the invisible threads pulling things in and out of viewable existence, your taste for food and appetite for excitement and titillation follow. You become sublime yourself. Basically, you're starting to live on those higher planes already. Returning to our books on mysticism and the higher planes, as we begin to experience these more subtle worlds, we begin to appreciate our spiritual growth as woven into that path that takes us from places of greater manifestation to those of lesser or finer manifestation. The Tao Te Ching says the formless gives rise to the formed, and the primordial was before that which came into the duality of yin and yang. John Milton, a brilliant 17th century English poet and philosopher, suggested the highest form of God is that which is unmanifest. We begin to sense the power of potential. A sense that this hair-splitting continues into the powerful difference between words and symbols. When you sit down to a lecture, you can imagine there are a lot of people in the audience who may know the subject so well they can predict every sentence the speaker will say. For them, those who came to hear something new, the hour-long lecture may be painful, waiting for the speaker to arrive at every point they already know. But when presented with a symbol instead of words, each person sees and experiences it in accordance with his or her own background and inclinations. The people who already know the subject are not slowed down in their intellectual digestion of symbols. In this way, to each their own. Think about it. Dreams are more symbolic than literal. It's not often that you'll have a conversation with someone when dreaming, as their mere presence suggests something to you. Then perhaps their actions or yours, if you dream that you're taking a college test for which you're unprepared and also are sitting in class with no clothes on, that the message is being caught unawares and unprepared. It doesn't really need to be driven home much further than that. If you fly in a dream, you may enjoy the ecstasy of being free of limitations. And again, is there a lengthy discourse or even a magic word that is the gatekeeper to that experience? Probably not. The language is symbolic. I believe that language in the higher realms is also symbolic, as is music in this realm. And the quieter our minds are in perceptions of those symbols, the more accurate our intuitions of their meanings are. Our projected desires or fears influence our perception of reality with symbols. A Rorschach test proves the point. The first time I ever saw one, there was one pattern that made me feel like I was seeing an explosion of possibilities in my mind. Standing back to look at this, you have to wonder as we project onto others our desires, asking, "What can you do for me?" and then interact with them to find out. What happens when you wash all of your makeup off or you lose your youth and vitality? When your number of choices and opportunities begin to decline with age? How then are we symbolized? I say this to indicate that it is in our nature to communicate in symbols and to impart meaning even to the simplest things. We want things to be rich with information, discovery into themselves. We understand the spoken word has a certain amount of information, but there is so much more to add when we consider body language, nuance, inflection, emotion, vocabulary, and even the perfectly timed pause. Understanding the differences above provides the information upon which to see with nonlinear understanding. It allows the worldly appreciation of life here, just like everyone else enjoys. It also allows seeing the intersection of probabilities before choice collapses one of their waves into a moment of physical reality. The will is free until it acts. The longer you can stand within that state of potential, the more power you will build up of your own. You've felt it when you get two competing but equally great job offers or social engagements. The longer you put off deciding, the more excitement builds for both until you're about to pop with anticipation. To a point, the longer you wait to choose, the greater the anticipation on the part of the other parties as well. Knowing when to choose is an art developed through practice. It's like creating a vacuum and then aiming it with your intention. Nature will make all efforts to fill it. Judgment and free will. Judgment. As you wake up into the new post-spiritually transformative experience you find yourself in a continual rediscovery of self. In these changes, you can consider all implications more deeply. In short, is what was true yesterday still true today? Buckminster Fuller said that if you're doing the right thing, universe will support you, not the universe, and usually just in the nick of time. Many times in my past, help came at the last minute. Help probably came in a million other less obvious ways in which I was oblivious as well. With time and repetition, I gained some experience in seeing or sensing the patterns in which I was being helped, and with that came less worry and more faith, even when waiting past the point of no return. It became a game, in fact, using the last few minutes in which everything was about to turn to disaster to look more deeply into everything for recognizable patterns of the emerging help coming. I realized also that waiting until the last minute was God's calling card. Otherwise, the randomness of the timing could look attributable to anything. As I approached the 1-year mark after my near-death experience, I was shown how interconnectedness works through my relationships. Watch the people in the relationships. Take nothing personally. Watch how God works through people. I realized God works through us, and we have no idea what's going on. Think about that. Everyone is on his or her own journey, and with most of us we're in control at least for a few minutes of our day. The fact that God can work through anyone to do what needs doing intrigues. The concept was reinforced recently by Tricia Barker, a friend of mine who has had an NDE and has a very popular podcast. She had an NDE in the operating room and saw the power of angels working directly through the hands of surgeons on her broken body. What is the person feeling right then? Do they feel good, purposeful, confused, or nothing at all? Seeing this as it happens, I'm now in a place to recognize it and ask in a way natural to the conversation. Take someone who worries about the net total each day of virtue or sin. Now imagine that one day God used you to help someone. During that moment, are you without sin? Could those God-inspired actions ever color so outside the lines to be, as the world sees it, unlawful? After all, to go from being a law-abiding citizen to a criminal is something no greater than the whimsy of a politician's pen. Just ask those who participated in the Underground Railroad. In the bigger picture, since God can work directly through anyone at any time, where's the question of eternal damnation? Is this a simple choice of us asking Him to fill our days not with the fruits of our desires or the purposes of our lives, but with the meaning of His? If so, where does judgment come in? Otherwise, you fall into contempt of your neighbor if you judge his evil will toward you, instead of my will acting in him. That was spoken by Catherine of Siena in the Dialogue of St. Catherine of Siena in 1370. Free will. How many times have you heard people wonder if there is free will or fate? To what extent has the illusion of free will contributed to our suffering versus making choices with a sense of being beholden to another person or higher purpose? Yet for the play we call life to move forward, this illusion seems necessary to the drama. The first thought I had is that there is both free will and fate. Fate is what happens to you throughout the day over which you have no control. Suddenly losing your job, winning the lottery, a loved one distractedly saying something dismissive and hurtful, or having or causing a traffic accident. We may have a minor role of awareness or take some small action, but we have no say over the outcome. But to the unexpected loss of a job, we can choose to become despondent, or we can feel liberated. To the impossible winning of the lottery, we can choose to spend, save, or donate. To the loved one who doesn't realize they hurt our feelings, we can respond with offense or forgiveness. A traffic accident shows us as either an instrument of the cause or a party to the effect. Shows us a myriad number of choices on how to respond and therefore define our roles in the range of possibilities. This is where another possibility between free will and fate exists, when God takes over and directs our actions without us knowing. As much as for any other reason, this can occur as an answer to our prayers. I mentioned this a few paragraphs above. God may help us by working through others, may also answer our prayers by moving us to act in unexpected and new ways. We may have no idea why we're suddenly inspired to go left when we usually go right, or thoughtfully listen when we'd normally fill the silence with our own comforting noise. In those moments, God's will works through us. I'm curious to meditate more on this because this is where living within His will, while not being necessarily conscious of it, come together. When I was aware, I was usually required to act very quickly without time to think about the opportunity presented to me. As I've seen, when all else fails, God designs situations unique to us where there are no other choices than for events to unfold in an unavoidable way. The only way to atone for our past is to change the course of our future through better choices and decisions. The future as a set of probabilities is more important than our past, frozen without change. It is in the now we choose, collapsing one of those waves of possible futures into a single moment of reality we call the present. In the end, God creates the universe because He wills it into existence, moment by moment.